About a month ago, on my Shifting Sandland type beat, Neander Pedro asked, "Bro, do you have a less complicated tutorial on how to use FL Studio? I struggle with it." And I was like, it might take some time, but I can try. Stay tuned. It's been a month. Sorry, it's been a month. But I asked what parts are you struggling with. He basically said sound selection and mixing. So I'm going to use the Shifting Sandland type beat as a means to try and explain my understanding and what I used. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I didn't know that I was going to make a Shifting Sandland type beat. I just happened upon some sound fonts that reminded me of that, sitar type sound that you hear in the original Shifting Sandland. To make a long story short, this video is not sponsored by Cymatics, but I use a lot of Cymatics drums just because, they have plenty of good free and paid drum samples on their website. So if you want to find, drum samples like this, just go to cymatics.fm. Again, not sponsored, but let's see what we have here. We have a kick. Just a nice hard knocking kick. Kind of a sharp clap. We have this tinny snare. We have this micro snare to kind of emphasize offbeats. Here's what they all sound like together. Some hi-hats. Some rides. And then these kind of tinny knocks at the end of every other loop, which sound very good when emphasized with the kick. And here's what they sound like all together. Next, for the intro, I didn't have the sound of entering a level in Mario 64, so I kind of just made one here. And I think that suits its purpose well. We also have this white noise and tonal elements to just kind of build us up into that first drop. And lastly, I don't exactly know the legalities between what makes a song a remix and what makes a song a cover, but I did use the original sample for the wing cap song that plays when you get a wing cap in Mario 64. So I'm calling this a remix because I'm using that original sample instead of recreating it on a piano or something. We also have some pitch modulation here, as well as some modulation for an EQ to just kind of make it thinner right before we, widen it back up in the drop. So here's what that sounds like, along with our other intro elements. And that's the whole intro. I'm not gonna lie, the drums are very much carrying the drop, because the drop itself, outside of the drums, it's just these three elements. We have some background texture, and it's just this kind of shimmering in the background, right? It's not really meant to be heavily emphasized. Our bass element, which is more or less just a sub bass with a little bit of saturation. And for the main melody and emphasis on the bass notes, we have this sound font player, which is just playing a sitar sound font from a Legend of Zelda Wind Waker sound font pack. I just found that somewhere online. I'm not going to explain that right now. And here's what that sounds like without the sub bass. With the sub bass, and with that texture. And lastly, with the drums. All right, now let's talk about the break. For the break, I took out some of the drums, and I added in some ambience on the sides. And this is, again, just to add more texture to our song, as well as some panned guitars to the left and right. And lastly, we have the sound that a thwomp makes, the hurr. So here's those toned down drums. We took out the hi-hats and put less emphasis on the snare. Next we have ambience, panned to either side. Here's what they sound like. And here's what they sound like together with that original texture that we talked about earlier. I was really trying to capture, being in a desert temple, right? And I really feel like this kind of captures that aesthetic. Lastly, possibly at the cost of making this song a little too busy, we have these panned guitars to the left and right. Here's what they sound like individually. Here's what they sound like together. Lastly, we took the melody out and just made it as bare bones as we could, just again emphasizing those original bass notes. Here's how that sounds with the sub bass. For the second half of the break, this also serves as a build-up, so we added kind of a light counter melody in to go along with those bass notes. Again, kind of emphasizing that desert feel, kind of dreary. With a little sense of hope at the end, almost. If I could describe how it makes me feel when I hear it in context. So here's the entire break / build up to the next drop. Lastly, for the outro, we just have some noise coming down, the reverberated sounds of anything that was playing before the outro, and then, just kind of that counter melody from the build-up and our panned guitars. And here's what that sounds like all together. And I guess that's it for sound selection, alongside some extra tips for arrangement. Okay, so let's talk about mixing real quick. For most of the drums, I don't really have anything on them. I might have some stuff on the bus to just kind of enhance where they are in the stereo, just add some presence, and then maybe soft clip it so it's not going too crazy, right? Like the kick's not even routed to this. The kick's actually routed to the final bus. I try to make the kick as raw as possible. For the bass, basically to just kind of take out some pops, I EQ'd it and then threw on some saturation and limiter. That's the saturation on that sub bass. For the main melody, for that sitar, here's what it sounds like without this reverb. Very plain, very just okay. But, with the reverb, it just kind of adds this presence, right, in the stereo, which I just thought it needed. So lastly, for these side elements, for these kind of like side guitars, I just have some OTT for some upward compression, some EQ to cut out the bass, a limiter. I guess it was trying to be too present. You could also use a compressor, but I just used the limiter because I was lazy. Some side chaining stuff that's basically just to take a little more presence out of it to make room for other elements. Balance is just for the outro, just to bring that sound's volume down just a little bit at the end. So not a lot of heavy mixing, a lot of it's just, by ear, what you hear is what you get. Personally, after coming back and listening to it after a long time, it does sound a little busy to me. I would probably turn these guitars down a little bit before an official release. I'm not officially releasing this because I don't have the rights to it. Most of this is for educational reasons. On my buses, it's just stuff to enhance the stereo, add presence, keep it from overpowering. And then on the mix bus, just controlling the mid and the sides, just shaping it to what I really want to hear. A little more upwards and downwards compression. This is just some saturation, again, just to add more presence to all the elements. Reverb is used to taste, usually for transitioning. Like you'll see I'll transition into the next section using this reverb automation. A soft clipper just to keep it from going crazy. And I haven't had my mastering plugin for this just because it uses a lot of CPU and it would cause a lot of clipping in the video recording. Mixing is a very subjective thing. You could hand a group of people, the same set of stems and they will make you several different types of mixes. Okay, so I hope that answered your questions. Just to re-emphasize everything, most of my drums, most of my percussive elements are cymatics samples, not sponsored. We have some textures and some ambiences in the background. We have a sub bass, which is just 3x OSC. The main melody was just a sound font from, the Wind Waker video game. And then those side guitars are just chill guitar by Flex, which comes with FL Studio. So, a lot of it is just finding out what you like and what you tolerate. Again, sound selection and mixing are very subjective. But, that was my approach. Most of the time, it's not very heavy mixing. It's just getting your elements around the right levels and then creating space for them. That's really all mixing is. But yeah, hope it helped. Y'all have a good one.